Holt Winslow stood in the middle of a ballroom full of people who thought they knew exactly who he was, and every single one of them was wrong. Security had already started walking toward him. His wife would not look at him, and the man with his hand resting on her lower back was smiling like he had already won something. What none of them understood yet was that in less than 20 minutes, that smile would be gone, and so would their jobs. This is the story of the night Holt Winslow lost his marriage and got his life back, all in the same room, in front of the same people who had spent 2 years underestimating him. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. We read every single one, and it means more than you know that you are here with us for this one. 3 years earlier, Holt was the kind of man nobody paid much attention to at parties, and he liked it that way. He was 44 years old, quiet, methodical, the type of person who read the terms and conditions before signing anything and remembered your kid's name the second time he met you. He worked in commercial real estate acquisitions for a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he was good at it in a way that did not draw applause. He found undervalued properties, ran the numbers twice, and closed deals that made other people rich while he collected a steady salary and a small bonus. His wife, Adeline, called him her rock. She said it often enough that people believed her, and for a long time, so did he. Adeline worked in marketing for a hospitality group downtown, and she was good at her job, too, the kind of good that came with dinners, conferences, and a lot of nights where she came home after Holt was already asleep. He never questioned it. Trust was not something he handed out easily, but once he gave it, he did not take it back over small things. That was his flaw, if you want to call it that. He mistook patience for loyalty. He believed that if you built something steady enough, it would hold, the same way he believed about buildings and about marriages. Their daughter, Ruthann, was 7, and she was the reason Holt got up every morning without needing an alarm. He packed her lunch himself, even on the mornings Adeline was still home, because it was the one part of the day that felt entirely his. Looking back now, Holt says that year was the last time his life felt simple, though he did not know it yet. Something had already started to shift, quietly, the way most important things do before anyone notices them. It started with small things that did not add up on their own. Adeline began taking calls in the bathroom with the fan running. She started dressing differently for work, nicer than the job required, and she stopped asking Holt to come to her company events, something she used to insist on. He noticed. He is the kind of man who notices numbers on a spreadsheet that are off by a few dollars, so he certainly noticed his own wife changing in front of him. But noticing and confronting are two different things, and for months, Holt chose to tell himself a story where none of it meant anything. Then, in March, Adeline's company hired a new senior executive named Trip Kavanaugh, brought in from a hospitality group in Atlanta to run business development. Holt met him exactly once, at a company holiday party the year before any of this became clear, and he remembers thinking Trip had the kind of handshake that lasted a beat too long, like he wanted you to notice it. Adeline mentioned him more than she mentioned anyone else from work, always framed as a colleague, always framed as nothing. Holt let it go because that is what you do when you have built your entire adult life around trusting the person next to you. The night everything changed direction was an ordinary Tuesday. Holt came home 2 hours early because a closing had fallen through, and he found Adeline's phone lit up on the kitchen counter with a message from a contact saved simply as T. He did not go looking for it. It was just there, on a screen that lit up on its own, the way phones do. He read 4 words before it went dark again, and those 4 words told him everything the last several months had been quietly building toward. He did not confront her that night. He sat with it, the way he sat with every hard decision in his life, turning it over until he understood exactly what it meant and exactly what he was going to do about it. What Holt discovered over the following 2 weeks, through nothing more dramatic than paying attention and asking careful questions, was that Adeline and Trip Kavanaugh had been involved for almost 5 months. He also discovered, almost by accident, that Trip's hospitality group was the parent company that owned the boutique hotel chain his own firm had been quietly circling for over a year, a struggling but well-located group of properties that was bleeding money under leadership that had grown careless and, as Holt would later confirm, dishonest with its books. If you're still with us, let us know where you're watching from and what the weather looks like where you are right now. It always surprises us how many different corners of the country end up in the same story together. Holt did not confront his wife. He did not confront Tripp. Instead, he did the one thing he was actually built to do, which was work quietly and thoroughly until the outcome was no longer in question. He brought the acquisition to his firm's partners with a level of documentation nobody expected from him, laying out exactly why the hotel group's numbers did not match its public filings, exactly where the mismanagement was hiding, and exactly why the current ownership would be desperate enough to sell if approached the right way, at the right time, for less than the properties were actually worth. His partners agreed to back the deal, but they wanted Holt to lead it personally, given how deeply he understood the company's weaknesses. For 4 months, Holt worked the acquisition from every angle, negotiating through intermediaries so that no one on the other side, including Tripp, would know his name was attached to it. He drained a portion of his own retirement savings to increase his personal equity stake, a decision he did not explain to Adeline, and one she did not ask about, because by then she was barely asking him anything at all. During this same stretch of time, Adeline grew colder at home in small, deniable ways. She stopped kissing him goodbye. She started staying at the office later, and later still. She once forgot to pick up Ruth in from a friend's birthday party, something that had never happened before in 7 years of parenting together. Holt never raised his voice about any of it. He simply kept working, kept picking up his daughter, kept packing her lunch, and kept closing the deal that would eventually put him at the head of the table Trip Kavanaugh worked under. The acquisition closed on a Friday in October. Holt now owned, through a holding company, his partners had structured specifically to protect his privacy, controlling interest in the hospitality group that employed both his wife and the man she was seeing. Nobody at that company knew his name yet. Not the outgoing chairman, not the board, and certainly not Trip Kavanaugh, who had spent the last several weeks nervously asking colleagues whether they had heard anything about who the new ownership group might be. 2 weeks after the deal closed, the company held its annual welcome gala for staff, partners, and new leadership, an event Adeline had helped plan for months without knowing her own husband would be standing somewhere in that room by the end of the night. Holt was invited under his holding company's name, a name that meant nothing to anyone at the party except the handful of board members who had been briefed privately that morning. Adeline had no idea her husband was coming. She had told him, almost as an afterthought, that she would be attending a work event that weekend and would probably be home late. Holt arrived quietly, in a simple gray suit, and found a spot near the back of the ballroom, where he could watch the room without drawing attention to himself, which had always been his natural habit anyway. He watched Adeline arrive on Tripp's arm, laughing at something he said, comfortable in a way she had not been comfortable with Holt in over a year. He watched Tripp introduce her to colleagues as though the two of them were already a fixture. A couple people were expected to get used to. Nobody in that room looked twice at the quiet man near the back, and that suited Holt just fine, because he was not there for attention. He was there to see something through to the end. If this story has your full attention right now, that means a lot to us. I am still here with you, and I promise the next part is worth staying for. It was Tripp who noticed Holt first, and not in a way that meant anything to him yet. He simply saw a familiar face from a company holiday party months earlier and, wanting to look generous in front of colleagues, decided to make an example of the quiet stranger standing alone near the wall. He walked over with a drink in hand and asked, loudly enough for a small circle to hear, whether Holt was lost, whether he had wandered into the wrong event, whether someone needed to call him a car. It was the kind of casual cruelty people use when they feel untouchable, and Tripp felt very untouchable that night. Adeline, standing beside him, said nothing. She did not defend Holt. She did not even meet his eyes. She looked, if anything, embarrassed that he was there at all, embarrassed in the way you are, embarrassed by something you have already decided to leave behind. A member of the venue's event staff, thinking Tripp's comments meant Holt was an uninvited guest, quietly approached and asked to see his invitation. Holt handed it over. Without a word, Tripp laughed and told the room that this was exactly the kind of person who wandered into events like this looking for a free meal and a few people around him. Laughed along, the way people do when someone senior is making the joke. Holt did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself. He simply thanked the staff member, folded his hands, and waited because he already knew what was coming in the next few minutes, and he had waited far too long to lose his composure now. At exactly 8 o'clock, the company's outgoing chairman, a man named Whitfield Marsh, stepped up to the small stage at the front of the ballroom to make what everyone assumed would be a routine welcome speech. Instead, he thanked the room for their patience during a difficult transition year and said he wanted to personally introduce the new majority owner of the company, a man whose holding company had quietly rescued the business from a sale that would have cost most of the people in that room their jobs. He asked Holt Winslow to come up and say a few words. For a moment, nobody moved. The name meant nothing to most of the room until people began turning to look for someone walking toward the stage and found, to their confusion, the same quiet man near the back wall that Tripp had mocked only minutes earlier. Adeline's glass tipped slightly in her hand before she caught it. Tripp's face went through 3 or 4 expressions in the span of 2 seconds, none of them the confident smile he had been wearing all evening. The room fell into the kind of silence that is louder than any noise, the sound of dozens of people realizing at the same moment that they had badly misjudged the person standing in front of them. Holt walked up slowly, unbuttoned his jacket, and did not gloat. He thanked the staff for their hard work over a difficult year, thanked the outgoing chairman for his guidance during the transition, and said only one thing that had anything to do with the last 10 minutes. He said that he understood how easy it was to misjudge a stranger in a room, and that he hoped everyone here would remember, going forward, that the people you overlook are often the ones who end up deciding what happens next. Then he stepped down, and the party, awkwardly, tried to continue around him. What followed over the next several weeks was not loud or dramatic, because Holt had never wanted loud or dramatic. He asked his legal team to conduct a full internal review of Tripp Kavanaugh's business development contracts, and within a month, they confirmed what Holt had already suspected, that Tripp had been steering vendor contracts toward companies he held private financial interests in, a clear conflict of interest that had cost the hospitality group hundreds of thousands of dollars over 2 years. Tripp was terminated for cause and lost any severance he might otherwise have received. Adeline, for her part, resigned from the company before she could be formally addressed, understanding correctly that her position had become impossible once ownership changed. She and Holt separated within 2 months of the gala, and the divorce, while painful, was handled quietly and fairly, with Holt insisting that Ruth Ann's routine stay as stable as possible no matter what else was falling apart around her. He never once used Ruth Ann as a way to punish Adeline. even when he had every reason to feel like doing so. I am still here, and if you were too, I would love to know something honestly. If you were in Holt's position that night, standing in that ballroom while people laughed at you, would you have stayed calm the way he did, or would you have said something? Tell me in the comments, because I think about that question more than I expected to. 6 months after the gala, the hospitality group had stabilized under new leadership, with several of the properties that had been mismanaged now profitable for the first time in years. Employees who had feared layoffs during the ownership change were, instead, given retention bonuses funded partly by the money recovered from the vendor contract fraud. Holt kept a low profile within the company, preferring to let his operational team run daily business while he focused on long-term strategy, which had always been where his real strength lived anyway. He and Ruth moved into a smaller house closer to her school, one with a backyard just big enough for the trampoline she had been asking for since she was 5. On weekends, he still packed her lunch for the week ahead, a habit he never let go of, even after everything else in his life had been rebuilt from a different foundation. He did not remarry quickly, and he did not date publicly for a long time. Friends who worried he had become guarded after everything with Adeline eventually realized that what looked like guardedness was really just Holt being Holt, patient, deliberate, and entirely unwilling to build anything on ground he had not carefully tested first. Whitfield Marsh, the outgoing chairman, later told a colleague that the biggest mistake people made around Holt Winslow was assuming that quiet meant weak, when in reality it usually meant Holt had already finished thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Employees who had once overlooked him at company events began telling a slightly different version of that story at every holiday party since, the story of the man nobody noticed until the night everyone had to. Holt never spoke publicly about what happened to Adeline or Tripp beyond what the situation legally required, and he never once framed himself as a victim in front of Ruth Ann. What he wanted her to understand, as she got older, was not a story about revenge, but a story about what it looks like to keep showing up for the people who depend on you, even during the exact months when your own life is falling apart. That, more than the gala, more than the acquisition, more than the look on Tripp's face when his name was announced, is the part of this story Holt says he is proudest of. If this story meant something to you, I would genuinely like to know. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had already figured you out? What did you do about it? And looking back, would you do it differently? Tell us where you're watching from one more time before you go, because these conversations in the comments are honestly one of my favorite parts of making these stories with you. Thank you for staying with this one from beginning to end. If you are new here, consider joining us for the next story, because there is another one coming very soon that I think you are going to want to see.